Good evening and welcome everyone to another edition of the Black Male Podcast. I'm your host, AP. Today's show is going to be on the subject of grief. Grief is something that we all face. Grief is also something that we all will go through at some point of our lives. Grief is something that is a part of life, and it's that part of life that we, even though we may mentally and emotionally prepare for, when it happens, it hits us like a ton of bricks. I like to use bricks as an analogy because of this physical shape and how it feels when it impacts you. So, the earlier show I said about carrying bricks in a backpack and unloading the bricks out your backpack to lighten your load. Sometimes when things happen to you, you get hit in the face with a brick and it hurts. So I'm going to say the same thing here. When you are faced with some things and some things is difficult for you to go through, when you feel like it's hard for you to make things go and to make things happen or to have some sort of peace and clarity, it is because of what we're going to talk about today. Now, first, I will say the last show was uploaded. There was no notice for the last show, but the last show was uploaded on the YouTube page. It's on the subject of overthinking. And while I was doing that show, I had already said what the next show was going to be on. That's going to be on the subject of grief. I decided to talk about grief because it is something that we all go through. Yet it is something that is hard for us to face. My family, if you can see on my shirt, we just recently had a death in the family. We just had a loss of a loved one. My oldest nephew, which is like my second son, died unexpectedly, very young. We will know what it is soon. But first of all, for those who are watching, I do want to, if you have reached out to us via text or phone call as a family spokesperson, I do humbly appreciate each and every one of you. There's an old adage that it takes a village to raise a person, but it also takes a village to uplift people when they're at their lowest or when they're feeling a part of pain and discernment. It's a very difficult thing to go with and deal with. As my brother said a week ago, no one can tell me how to grieve. And I agree with that 100%. No one can tell anyone how to grieve, but also how long it takes you to grieve a loss. There's one thing that I know and I will speak on. Grief has no expiration date. Grief would not have it does not have an expiration date. When someone tells you that it's about time you move on and you look at something different and you try to do something different, that's not for them to speak on. The way that you grieve is particular to you. The way that you look at grief is also particular to you. And in that grief that you feel, emotional and physical and spiritual, it also ties in to the upbringing that you have. But with this grief that we face and what we deal with, we feel that we are more than what we are. The grief that we feel is hard for us to deal with because it's one of those taboo things that a lot of people don't want to talk about. We shun it. We don't want to shed light on it. You know, I would say it's easier to deal when you know when someone's going to go, as opposed when you don't know when someone's going to go, when they go unexpectedly, when it comes out of nowhere, right? Case in the point of my nephew. No one knew. It was a complete shock to us. Complete shock. Someone relatively healthy. And sometimes those are the hardest ones to accept and to deal with. And you go through your 5 stages of grief that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But to mentally and emotionally and physically deal with the loss of someone is very difficult. And not just someone, not just a human. You know, people have grief over Pets. Some folks' pets are part of their family. Some folks have, and I would say this right now, life insurance on their pet, because their pet is a part of their family. It is an integral part of who they are. They have assimilated a piece of you. They are a part of you. So that's one thing that I decided that I was going to talk about today, because I feel like, that is something that we all go through, but it's something that we shun to face. I know that's one thing that we don't want to readily accept, and it's hard for us to accept, especially when it's the last text message or the last phone call or the last time we got together or the last time we had a laugh or the last time we had an argument, and we'll play those things and replay those things in our mind constantly. And we'll have that constant reminder of a memory or a thought, or we'll beat ourselves up with the idea that that person isn't here, that I wish I could have just one more time with that person, or just one more instance with this person. It's a thing that's come out the last 5 years. Give me my flowers while I'm alive. I heard a preacher say that long time ago, years ago. I was in high school, and he said that, don't wait till I'm there to give my flowers. Give me my flowers right now. And it didn't resonate until years later, until it became something that everyone started to say. And the basis of that is, I want to acknowledge you and accept you and let you know who you are and what you mean to me while you're around, to appreciate that. And see, that goes to a lot of appreciation, a lot of thought, and a lot of notion that we have, but also to a lot of the things that we will face and a lot of things that we deal with, such as this thing called grief. Now, it's going to be hard for us to go through, because it's hard. It's really hard. Now, I want to think back about the time when my dad passed away. And a lot of people don't know this, but I particularly didn't have a relationship with my dad until I had a kid, and we were working on it, and it was getting to the point to where we were really good terms. We talked more than a lot of other people thought we were talking, and then boom, he was gone. So I was asked by one of my uncles to speak at his funeral, and at first I was like, okay, I'll think about it, but then I said, you know what, I'll do it. As being the oldest of his children, I'll do it, right? One part of me thought it was, honorable for them to ask me to speak. But then, too, I think that was part of a divine intervention for me to speak at his funeral. I think the reason why it was is because which I probably didn't know, is he probably let on to them how much we talked. Or my stepmom could have told them how much we talked, because we did. Our relationship was growing. We talked almost every day. I still have messages on social media and in my phone from him of the last messages that we spoke. The last conversation that we had where we both laughed. Sometimes I will see a post that, just talked to Dad today. It was a great conversation. I'm glad we're getting to where we need to be. And then I'll think about that time, and it's good that I have that memory, that I'm able to go back and think about those times, that now that he's not here, I can replay those memories. I can accept the fact that, he wasn't there for whatever reason. He wasn't there, which is, that's neither here nor there. But I had an opportunity to meet him and have a relationship with him. And that's something that I will always treasure to the death of me. I will treasure that to the death of me, because I feel like with that memory, that lasting memory, that was something I can have ultimate peace. Now, I had just missed him having his last breath, right? So I spent like an hour in the hospital room with him. It's something that a lot of people don't know. I spent an hour with him before anyone else came in the room. And I just sat there looking at him. And in my mind, I'm just replaying every conversation we had, every laugh we had, even when we'll go back and forth and we'll banter with each other, because there's a lot of me that came from him. And it's a lot of me of knowing and understanding who I am as a man that comes from him. So I did thank him for, number one, for me being here, but I also thanked him for the time that we did have. You know, some people have, you know, their people around, and it could be a parent, it can be a child, it can be a grandparent around, and they live with them all their life and not have a great memory with them. They can have, you know, a poor existence with them. But you can have someone come in and it can be God's timing, and then you can have the greatest memory with them because of the things that you built in that time, which a lot of people, they don't have, and they won't have that. But I am very appreciative that I did have that time with him. So I'll speak on that. Now let me briefly speak on my nephew. Now, my nephew was someone that every time I went home, he was right there with me. Every time he came here with my family, he was with me. And even though now it's football season, we would go back and forth. We would banter back and forth all the time. All the time. All the time. He was a great kid. Great kid. Every kid goes through their ups and downs. Granted, I did too. You know, no one is immune of going through a hardship or a good time. No one is, right? But the thing about it is that how do we move forward when that person is no longer here? And I'm going to tell you the loss of my nephew was very hard because, like I said, I every time I went home, he was with me. When I got that call from my sister, it floored me. I didn't know what to think. I had to try to put everything together. You know, it's still much of a mystery to all of us. You know, it's one thing that we will face, for a very long time. Even when we know what led to him not being here. It's just a fact that he was young and he's no longer here. So that's one thing that we will be facing. And it's one thing that each of us will grieve differently, but to the same extent, we will grieve because he's not here. So we're going to get into the subject of grief, right? And as always, if this is your first time watching this show, I like to cover a topic, but with covering that topic, I like to define the meaning, right? Because I feel like if you have a clear definition, you have a starting point. So with having that starting point, you know the true essence of its meaning, right? So grief, okay? Grief by definition is the response to the loss of something deemed important, particularly to the loss of someone or some living thing that has died, to which a bond or affection was formed. Although conventionally focused on the emotional response to the loss, grief also has physical, cognitive, behavioral, social, and cultural, but spiritual and philosophical dimensions. While the terms are often used interchangeably, bereavement refers to the state of loss, while grief is the reaction to that loss. When we take that time off, when we have a loss in the family, or we're going to attend to someone's celebration of life, memorial, we call it bereavement, right? Because it's the loss of the person, right? But the reaction of the loss is the grief that we feel. The grief that we feel, and the grief of the notion that that person is not here. You know, mentally, physically, and emotionally, and even spiritually, no matter what you believe in, it's going to be something based on how you assimilate of the things that you are and what it is that you feel you do. Now, one thing that's going to happen is it's going to make you go to a different plane or think of a different thing while you're grieving. And no one can tell you how to grieve. And the grief that is associated is associated with pain. The pain that you're going to feel. The pain of that loss. The pain of knowing that that person is not around anymore. But the bereavement part is the actual motion and the notion of that person not being here. The grief is just a reaction to that loss. And when we react to that loss, it's a lot of tears, a lot of heartache, lack of sleep, don't want to eat, don't know what to think, and just being in a place where it's very hard for you to be. Sometimes when people are grieved, they get very depressed, and and then you will twinge and you'll teeter on being depressed. And sometimes it's very hard for you to accept the help that's around because you're still dealing with the reaction of that person or the animal, like I said earlier, or something not being there anymore, something not being in your space anymore. And that's the reaction, which is called grief. But when we are bereaved and we are thinking of the person that is gone, we want to think those happy thoughts. Even when we recollect on a memory or an idea of something not being tangible or something being very bad, it will always go back to a happy thought. Meaning why we don't want to have anything negative that treasures up or will be ground up by something that has affected us in a way where we're struggling. And then when we struggle with that, it's very hard for us to sit and accept the loss of someone because it will go through those stages of denial. The stages of grief. And with those stages of grief, the first one is denial because you don't want to believe that that person is not here anymore. Now, that part of denial is very hard and it's very strong because with it being the first sign, it's like you can't believe that person is no longer around. You can't believe that their pet is not around. You face and you struggle with the idea that I can't call this person anymore. I can't hear their voice anymore. There's things about that person that I won't be reminded of. Or I remember when this person did this, or I remember hearing me walking through the door and my animal greeting me when I get to the door and that animal is no longer here and then I feel it. If you have an animal and that animal goes away and that animal is no longer living, it's hard for an animal, especially those who have dogs and the dog is no longer here. It's hard for them to say, you know what, I'm going to go get another dog. Someone will say, are you going to go get you another dog? And then that person will say, it's going to take me a while. I have to get over the loss of whatever the name of the dog is because that dog played a part of their life. And they don't have to be a dog. It can be a cat. It can be a snake. It could be anything. Anything that you showed love and you knew depended on you for its existence. Not just a human being. Because in this thing called life, we are enacted and equated with a whole bunch of things that will encompass our life. It will also make us become who we are, because that's something that we will learn and we will know what life truly is. But knowing what life truly is how to live and deal with that grief, how to live and deal with the bereaved, how to live and deal with the loss of someone or something, which to an extent is something that some of us can get over it in a short period of time. Some of us can get over it in a medium amount of time. And some of us, it will take a very long time to get over because of the role that person or thing played in our life. Now, sometimes it's very hard for us to get over grandparents because sometimes our grandparents raised us. Sometimes our grandparents are more parent to us than, in some cultures, than our actual parents, for whatever reason it may be, right? It happens. But it doesn't mean that there's any love lost from the person that is your birth giver or which is your mother or a father that's around. But grandparents are magical people. Grandparents, not only do they show you love in a different way, they show you love in a way that you wish sometimes your parent did. But sometimes that parent doesn't show that love because they're learning to love too. And not until they become a grandparent do they learn what it is to have love. I mean, we can love our things and we can love our children, but until we see the offspring of our children, do we innately find an existence of what love is for a child. And that's why sometimes people get upset with their parent when they show an abundance of love and joy for seeing that grandchild, because that's a blessing to see. It's also a blessing to be around someone that has had a grandchild, because they see life differently, right? They're going to see life at its true course, that life is meant to be lived. Life is meant to have memories. Life is not about how much I acquire. Life is about the stories I have to tell. Because at the end, when they're playing the video and you're watching these pictures and things that go by, it's going to be who's in those pictures that's going to impact everyone. Because you're going to look and see what type of life that person have. Either they're going to be a world traveler or they're going to be one with their family. And it's okay to be that way. It's okay to be both, but it's up to everyone else to accept that, because that person is going to affect someone in a different way, but everyone's not going to be affected in that same manner. But in the subject of grief and knowing what it is to grieve for that person that's no longer here is the effect that they had on us. No matter how long they've been here on this earth, that one day all of us will pass on, but it's the amount of care and it's also the amount of love that I've shown and I've received that I will reciprocate back to that person, that you will then be bereaved, but also grieve when that person is no longer here. So let's jump into the 5 stages of grief, right? Because as I said earlier, the first time when I first got the news of the passing of my nephew, which he's on my shirt, I didn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. If you'd have told me today, if I was in a coma and somebody would have told me my nephew died about 3 weeks ago, I would have looked at you like something's wrong with you. Because like I said, he wasn't that type of kid. Not at all. Wasn't that type of kid. Didn't get in any trouble. Wasn't involved in no foolishness. It just happened. Which, like I said, we're gonna get the news and we will know. But it's still hard for us to accept that he's not around. Now let's think about his younger sisters and brother. It's gonna be hard for them as well, because how do they make sense of that? How do they make sense of their older brother who just had a birthday is no longer here? That's a very difficult thing to say, right? It's a very difficult thing to listen to or accept. But part of that denial is knowing and accepting that that person is no longer here. And how long it's going to take for you to get there depends on you. And you're going to be the one to determine how long that is. But even when you started to get over that speed bump, to know that it's okay to accept that that person is no longer here, that you can start feeling better. You can't get down on yourself because you feel better about that person. You're still going to feel what you feel for that person. You're still going to grieve for that person by them not being here, but it doesn't mean that they don't mean anything to you, because you're accepting that they're no longer here. So that's also that part of life, and also a part of accepting that loss is getting over the denial part. And as soon as we get over that denial part, we get mad, which is number 2, the anger part. We get so frustrated with not knowing or wondering of why this person is gone. Even if we know why this person is gone, it is very hard for us to accept for this person to be gone. We get so upset, so furious, so angry that we can do anything. Our thoughts are running. Our mind is not at peace, is not at ease. And our mind is triggering our emotions. Our mind will play onto the things that we will do. Our mind plays on the things that we're going to say based on what we feel, because we're so pissed off, so frustrated. And when we get so frustrated, those tears flow from our eyes like rivers. And when they flow from our eyes like rivers and hit our shoes like a hard rain. And if you have been in a hard rain, You know exactly what that sound makes. It's a hard thud. Hard thud. So imagine you crying so hard that it's hard for you to breathe. It's hard for you to even think straight. And you think the worst things because you're so pissed off and so angry because that person is not here, no matter how they're not here. But you are upset that that person is not here, that it affects you. It will affect you mentally, spiritually, emotionally, but even physically. You can start to develop headaches. You can develop high blood pressure. You can have panic attacks. Right? These are a part of those things, a part of that anger part. Right? But I'm going to get to that because when I'm angry, that's good. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be angry when you're in that stage of grief. Reason why is because you care. You're angry because you care. If you didn't care, that would be something completely different. You wouldn't have these emotions that are sprouting up, right? But after you get angry, you want to bargain, right? Someone will say, well, why would this person go? How come someone else didn't go? How come someone who's a bad person or someone that's older didn't go or someone that should have been gone is gone? See, we like to bargain with that because we play these things in our mind because in our minds, especially when they're unexpected, we're not ready for them to go because we feel like they got a whole life in front of them. Even if they've lived a full life and they are old, right? They're an older generation person. And some of us are not still able to accept that that person is gone. I'll tell you something that my mother said about her mother when she passed away. We were riding away from the funeral, going to the repast. The first thing she said in the back seat, she said, no drug, no alcohol will numb this pain. And I don't understand why my mom is gone. And my grandmother died suddenly as well. And that's something that my mother, being the youngest of my grandmother's children, that she had to face and she had to deal with. And the way that she dealt with is she put that in her mind. No drug, no alcohol. And my mom doesn't do drugs. She drinks now, but, here and there. But nothing's going to numb this pain. And some of us feel that way. There's nothing that I can do that's going to numb what I feel. Because I've already accepted that this person is gone, but I'm pissed off that this person is gone. But why is this person gone and not someone else that, quote unquote, deserves or was a likely person to be gone, other than the person that's gone? That's hard. That's hard for us to accept. But it's also hard for us to deal with. And then when we deal with that, and after we deal with that, we become depressed. And it's going to affect you. And some of us are going to have different stages of depression. Now think about it. If it's someone that you care for deeply and they're not here, it's going to hit you like a ton of bricks. It's going to hurt. And it's supposed to hurt. And if it's okay for you to show that it hurts, and for some people to think that I'm going to be tough or it's going to be hard and I'm not going to show this, that's BS. Because part of you being a human is part of you showing emotion. You have to show emotion. You have emotions that are in you. They're ingrained in you. So that part of you is something that makes you human. And if you weren't human, then that's something else. Animals have emotions that they show. They'll show you when they're frustrated, when they're hungry, when they're tired. They do the same things. They do things differently, though. But they show. We show it as well, but we show it in a different manner. But when we become depressed, in the stage of grief, which is the fourth stage of grief, and we have varying degrees of this grief and varying degrees of the depression that's going to hit us. We like to barter with ourselves, or I'm okay, or someone asks you, how you doing? And sometimes we're not honest about those feelings, but those feelings are true because we are hurt. We are hurt that that person is not here. We are hurt that someone is not here that was here. That we don't have any answer. That even if we had an answer, that they're gone. And in a matter, sometimes I had a coworker that their dad, and I worked with their dad, that their dad suddenly passed away. Didn't want anyone to know how they passed away, but when they were going, they went real fast. And it was hard for her. It was hard for her. And I went to that funeral. And it was very hard to see him laying there because he was a great guy. He was a great guy. A great guy. Didn't have a bad bone in his body. Even when he was upset, there was a way that he showed that he was upset. And that was something that at that time I could accept. But my other co-workers, when they thought about him or someone said his name, they would just draw back. And that's the way they dealt with it. They dealt with it in that way. But when you try to shun those feelings and those emotions, you're not giving yourself the ability to fully grieve for that person, because that's all going to be a part of it. That's all going to be a part of it. There's no way I could have did this show 2 weeks ago on this subject. No way. It was too raw. And still, I'm thinking about it right now. There's no way I still feel okay to do it, but because it's still fresh. I can accept that my nephew's gone. Am I okay with it? No, I'm not okay with it. Did I try to bargain with it? I'm like, yeah, of course. That's a part of it. Maybe I wasn't depressed. Maybe I was. Maybe there was a time that I didn't want to talk to anybody. Maybe I wasn't. And maybe there was a varying degree of being depressed. Because we're all going to face that. If someone says these things that people always put a negative part or a negative notion on are bad, what's the good that comes about it? Like crying. It's good to cry. Because after you cry, you release those positive endorphins. You start feeling better. All that weight after you cry is released because it's gone. Because whatever was built up has just gone out. Like a rain cloud. Like a rain cloud. Rain clouds are real dirty. It's real dark. After it rains, what is a cloud? White. There's no more rain clouds up there. You don't see anything. You don't see any lightning. You don't hear anything. You can hear the thunder. There's nothing. Why? It is gone. Excuse me. So when you think about it in that manner, clouds have to cry too. Because once they cry, everything goes back to where it should be. Right? But I want to get through that part of that being depressed because it's okay. And if it's your child or if it's your parent, let me back up before I get to this next step. There's nothing realer than being on that front row. And if you haven't been on that front row, when it's your turn, life is different. Being at someone's celebration of life is completely different. Sitting in that front row. Thoughts, feelings, and emotions are magnified by 20. I'm not going to say by 10, by 20. Things are magnified because you're sitting there and you're looking right at your loved one right there. You are. It's different than knowing that person and going to the wake or going to the funeral. Now, at my nephew's wake, there are a couple of his friends that came through. And I can tell his loss hit them very hard because all a couple of them did was just sit there and they cried. Because number one, they couldn't believe it was him, but they showed that emotion and it was okay for them to show that emotion. It was okay. You know, the first thing they did, they asked if my sister was his mom. She said yes. She nodded her head yes. And you know what they did next? They gave her a hug. Because that's how a lot of people show love. Even at the worst opportune time that someone is feeling, a hug is a form of saying it's okay, and there was love that was shown, even though you may not know that person. That was a sign that they can show that they cared, and that they cared about my nephew, that they had whatever relationship with him. That's a sign. Now, I'm sure they're going through their form of grief, and then they're going to go through their form of anger and denial and being depressed, right? Because they have to have their time of having this whole thing of being grieve and bereaving of someone that's not here. But when we get to the fifth part, is when we are truly starting to move forward. And even when we move forward and we start to accept, which is number 5, sometimes we don't give ourselves the opportunity to even truly accept that that person is gone. Because even with that, we beat ourselves up for even being okay that they're gone. And sometimes we will beat ourselves up with the thought and the notion that we shouldn't be okay with them being gone because I'm still mad and I'm still pissed off and I'm still hurt. See, just because it's a stage and how they go doesn't mean they can't interchange or go back and forth. That's something that a lot of people don't want to believe. But it does happen. It happens because we're human. And our emotions and our thoughts, they go back and forth. They flip-flop all the time. And especially when it's something that's very hard and very tough. The first things a lot of people like to do is they like to draw back. They like to think of the good times. They like to think of those good thoughts. And then some people, all they do is they think of something negative. Well, I'm glad that person's gone, or the world's a lot better with that person not being here. But that person belonged to someone. No matter who someone is and no matter what they did, they still belong to someone. You think about it. Even the worst person in the world at one time was loved by someone. And that someone is going to care when that person's not around. Even though they may not outwardly show it or say it, they're going to be upset that that person's not here. And it may be hard for them to accept. Even though they may be at peace with them not being here, at some point they may not do that. They may not be happy with it. Have you guys ever thought about the notion of when an elderly couple, when there's the male or the woman, they die? The study says the partner will live 3 to 6 months after that death because the grief will cause so much heartache and pain for them that it'll be easier for them to go. And they go a lot faster because of the love that they had with one another. And it doesn't mean that they didn't care, because that's completely opposite. It doesn't mean that they would have like some type of sickness or something like that. They're heartbroken. How many people know someone that has happened to? I know a few. I know some people that have done that. It's hard for them to go on living life because they've built a foundation with someone, or they have this life that they have with someone, and now life has been disrupted. And now with the life being disrupted, they're going to go through stage 1 through 5 in a different manner. Either they go from 1 to 4, 5 to 3, 3 to 2, 2 to 1, 1 to 2. However it goes, they're going to teeter-totter. It's not going to be in a line. And then they have to deal with that. But then what if they say, I don't want to deal with that anymore? The pain is too hard for me to deal with because I can't accept that that person is gone. I don't care what anybody says. That person is still with me. And you can have that person cremated, and that person can still live with you, but the thought and the spirit of that person is no longer here. What's going to happen is they will then soon perish as well. That's a big sign of, a lot of people say, is love. That is a big sign of love that people have, and that they grieve the loss of a loved one. And when we grieve that loss of a loved one, it's very hard for us to come to a place where we are really accepting of what it really is. That part of life that's very hard for us to live with. That part of life that we never want to talk about. That part of life that we weren't shown that it's okay to have emotion when that happens. You know, we try to hide how we feel. We try to hide what we think. We can't do that. It's okay. We live in today's age. It is okay. And it's been okay. But now I will tell you, in today's age, it is okay for you to say and for you to feel the way you do. I was asked to read a poem at my nephew's funeral, something that I wrote. And in my mind, I'm playing it the entire time. In my mind, before I got up there, when I got up there, my voice cracked. And it was hard for me to deliver in the manner in which I said it. Why? Not because I have performance anxiety, but because I was right there. I prepared something for him in his memory for all of us to be able to accept that he was no longer here. And in that time, I went through every emotion, every of those 5 stages, sitting right there on that front row. And only if you were sitting right next to me would you know it. You wouldn't have known it. You wouldn't have known it. Had I not sat next to you, you wouldn't have known it. And especially when it's time to get up and speak. And that's something I'm going to have. Something I'm going to have for the rest of my life. And that's something I'm going to have until, I'm no longer able to speak. When there's no more breath in my body. And that's something that's okay. Because it's okay to love people, but it's also more important to grieve when they're not here. Because that's a sign that you really cared, but that you really loved them. And sometimes it's hard for us, especially men, for us to either really grieve someone because we want to do it in private, because somehow, some way, someone told us that was misinformed that men don't cry, that it's not okay to show emotion. But yeah, it's okay for me to show emotion because I want you to see how I feel about this. Because if I can't show you how I feel about this or how I feel about something else, how can you accept me as a person? It's going to be hard for you to accept me as a person. And we think that women are emotional creatures, yeah, by DNA standards, and a lot of women cry when that happens, but a lot of men cry when people pass away as well. And if you don't believe it, sit next to one, not just on that front row, but sit next to one during a funeral or a memorial and see how they respond. Because we're living in a different age, in a different life where those things are now prevalent. And it's okay. It's okay that now my family is now either starting to try to put the pieces back together. And it's okay for us to still be pissed off and angry and not accept that he's gone. And it's okay that if you have a recent death for you to feel that way. But it's also okay for you to know that not feeling okay and knowing that you're not okay is all right. You have that right. You have the right to grieve the way you grieve. Because grief has no expiration date. Ever. Grief would never have an expiration date because we care. We care. And if we didn't care and we said we didn't care, part of us still cares because something about that person that's no longer here affected us somehow. So we're going to show some sort of care, some sort of longing, and some sort of missing that person that's no longer here. I'm going to say what I just said again. Grief has no expiration date. So if you're currently grieving, like my family is, it's okay. You can grieve for as long as you need to. You can grieve as high as you want to, as low as you want to, as loud as you want to, as silent as you want to. But it's your choice to grieve. You can grieve. And let that be your truth. Let people know that, today I'm not okay. I'm not okay. And I'm not going to be okay. Why? Because I feel the way I feel. But it's important to get those things out. Because if I don't get those things out, then now I'm grieving in order to make myself in a place or put myself in a place where then I will then have to make or come up with answers for my behavior. So with that grief, we have to know and understand where we are. But with that grief, we have to know and understand that we're all human. And that we all one day will face being either grieved for or grieving for someone. I'm going to leave you with this last thought. When life comes at you fast, and it's that time for you to grieve, grieve proud and grieve loud. Because when it's your turn to go, you want someone to grieve loud and grieve proud for you. To quote Kendrick Lamar on one of his albums, he has a song called Sing About Me. He said, when the lights turn down and it's my turn to settle down, my main concern is to promise that you will sing about me. And he repeats that a couple times, meaning when I'm gone and everybody else is gone, the memory of me that pops in your mind and reminds you of who I am, even when those tears roll down your face, or even when a smile comes to your face, that you're going to talk about me. You're going to keep me alive in those memories that you have. But you're going to sing about me, sing a song for me, so that I live. That is today's show. Thank you for watching live. If you watch it live, if you were watching it on YouTube, I thank you and I appreciate you. You can like and subscribe if you are not a subscription member. Please get the word out. We'll have another show this week coming up. And as always, be good to yourself. Be good to others. Long live Jaquan. Peace.